woman sat at her window. She was worried. Her son should have returned by now. She peered out through the lattices and she started wailing. Why is he so late? He should already be back. The other women present try to comfort her. They make up all kinds of excuses as to why her son is delayed. But in her heart, she knows the truth. He's not coming back. His lifeless body lies somewhere in a ditch. She knows that the words her companions speak aren't true. He's not coming back. And she begins to wail. The preeminent symbol of the high holidays is the shofar. There are many different explanations for why we blew the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read about the binding of Isaac and how a ram was sacrificed instead of Abraham's son. The shofar is a ram's horn, and by blowing the shofar, we remind God of Abraham's merit, and we hope that God will be merciful to us for Abraham's sake. The shofar is bent. It symbolizes our contrition over our sins and failings. In ancient Israel, as throughout the ancient Near East, the shofar was used as a battle cry, signaling troops what to do in the heat of the fighting. So Maimonides tells us that the shofar is the battle cry of our soul, rousing us from our spiritual slumber and calling us to fight against the evil inclinations which want us to remain complacent. But there's another explanation for the shofar with which you may be less familiar. The Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah 33b tells us that the sounds of the shofar are supposed to remind us of the sounds of the woman I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that she made as she looked out the window and realized her son wasn't coming home. There's no sound in the world that is more pitiful, more broken than that. If the sound of the shofar is to arouse compassion, there's no sound more appropriate than this. And who is this woman who sits at the window crying over her lost son? Is it Hannah, the heroic woman who lost 7 children in the fight against Antiochus and the Seleucid Empire, which gave us Hanukkah? Perhaps it's Samson's mother, waiting for her heroic son to return from fighting the Philistines. But no, the woman who sits at the window and wails, whose pain we recall as we sound the shofar, is Sisera's mother. Now, unless you come to synagogue on the Shabbat when we read the Song at the Sea, and you pay attention that morning to the Haftarah, you may well be asking yourself, who is this Sisera? And what does his mother have to do with anything? Sisera was the Canaanite general who was seduced by the heroine Yael, who drove a tent peg through his forehead while he slept. He was a bloodthirsty enemy general, and his well-deserved death meant our ancestors enjoyed peace and quiet for 40 years. And if you think about it, when else did Jews enjoy peace and quiet for 40 years, right? So the passage which we read as the Haftarah on Shabbat Shirah reminds us that even bloodthirsty enemy generals have mothers, and that these mothers suffer when their sons are killed. The Orthodox Union's website says, in explaining the shofar. Perhaps this is the point that the sages are making. So great is the grief of any parent for the loss of a child that we all are left completely bereft. The universality and commonality of suffering over the loss of a child transcends names and identities. Or Rabbi Ed Feld of the Jewish Theological Seminary writes, on Rosh Hashanah, we are to feel not only the pride of victory, but the pain that was caused to the mother of our enemy, even when we fought in a righteous cause. Now, there are times in the Jewish calendar when we recall our own pain. Yom HaShoah, Tisha B'Av, the numerous minor fasts that few of us observe, such as the 17th of Tammuz or the 10th of Tevet. But during the days of awe, the Talmud wants to remind us that if we want to get God's attention and motivate God to have mercy on us, we need to recall not only our pain, but those of others as well. Our suffering is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. We are not exempt from having empathy for others, even the mother of our enemy. Now, if you were raised in a Jewish family, chances are that some of your earliest Jewish memories are of the Pesach Seder. And when we come to the 10 plagues, we spill a drop of wine at the mention of each plague, because we recall the sufferings of the Egyptians, and that tempers our joy at our own deliverance. And we're reminded of the Midrash that God prevented the angels from rejoicing at the parting of the Red Sea. God said to the angels, my creatures are drowning in the sea. My creatures. The Egyptian soldiers. Who's the Midrash we're talking about. My creatures are drowning in the sea, and this is not a time to sing songs of praise. The idea that we should have empathy for others, even if they're our enemy, is ingrained in us as Jews from an early age. Now, there's always danger in preparing a sermon that is connected to current events, because the situation can change drastically and render the sermon useless. Right? And I was trying to finish drafting this sermon Monday afternoon, and my phone was pinging with all kinds of notices. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed on a 20-point peace plan for Gaza. Saudi Arabia is going to join the Abraham Accords. Oh, maybe not. Hamas was upset because it hadn't been consulted. And then Tuesday, there are reports that Hamas is leaning towards accepting the plan. I said on Rosh Hashanah, quoting Yogi Berra, making predictions is difficult, especially about the future. What I can tell you is that large majorities of Israelis, right, center, and left, support this plan. Also, large majorities of Israelis, right, center, and left, think that this plan is unlikely to succeed. But I didn't come here to talk about policy anyway. I want to look at what the Gaza situation is doing to the Jewish soul and what it's doing to the American Jewish community. Now, I've long maintained that if you are being attacked simultaneously from both the left and the right, you're probably about where you need to be, right? But I have to tell you, it was an unnerving experience a couple of weeks ago to be attacked as a genocide apologist when I told a college classmate and now former Facebook friend that I found her suggestion that American Jews should be targeted because of Netanyahu's policy anti-Semitic. And the same week, I was called a capo by other DC area Jews because I gave a supportive Facebook comment on a post by the Jewish Community Relations Council, okay, in which I said, Allah is not a different deity, it's simply the Arabic word for God. And Arabic-speaking Jews and Arabic-speaking Christians also call God Allah. It's not a different God, it's just the Arabic word for God, like Elohim in Hebrew. Right? In fact, if you remember nothing else, remember this, Maimonides, he wrote his Guide for the Perplexed in Arabic. And in the Guide for the Perplexed, he not only calls God Allah, but the word halacha, right? You know the word halacha? The word halacha is translated by Maimonides as Sharia. Maimonides supported Sharia law. Okay? Now, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl gave a sermon on Rosh Hashanah which she called The Cries of Isaac and Ishmael. I'm going to quote the opening of her sermon at some length because what she says encapsulates my feelings as well, and I'm pretty sure those of many other rabbis right now. I want to tell you about my unconditional love for the Israeli people and our beleaguered homeland, still desperately struggling to bring its hostages home, still trying to eliminate Hamas, terrorists that not only refuse to lay down their arms, but intentionally trap their own people inside a combat zone. But if I tell you these things, all of which I believe, some of you will just stop listening and decide that I'm no longer your rabbi. I also want to tell you how my heart breaks over the civilian deaths and tragic suffering in Gaza, the shattering destruction of Palestinian homes and cities. I want to denounce settler violence in the West Bank and the rhetoric from far-right government ministers who talk about annexation of the West Bank and expulsion of Gazans instead of ending this war and bringing our hostages home. But if I tell you these things, all of which I also believe, some of you will just stop listening and decide that I'm no longer your rabbi. This Israel conversation is ripping our community apart. So far, Angela Buchdahl, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl. The Jewish tradition teaches us that we have concentric circles of responsibility. Our first obligation is to our family, then to the needy of our city, then those of other places, until the circle widens to embrace the entire world. Last night, I quoted Hillel's famous dictum, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I?" if the Jewish people do not protect our own well-being, with rare exceptions, no one else will either. If we don't take care of each other, including the mutual responsibility between Israel and the diaspora, the Jewish people will not continue to exist. But if our concern is limited only to ourselves, we have no reason to exist. When we pour water from a vessel into another vessel, there's less water in the original vessel. But when we light a candle from another candle, the first candle is not diminished. Empathy isn't like water from a jug. It's like a flame. Rachel Goldberg Poland, whose son Hirsch lost his arm on October 7th, and then was murdered by Hamas after almost a year of captivity, recently said, "I can feel sorry for the innocent in Gaza because my moral compass still works." You don't need to choose. On Rosh Hashanah, we blew the shofar, the sounds meant to remind us of the grief of a mother who, like Rachel Goldberg Poland, has lost her son. On Yom Kippur, during the Al-Chet and the Ashamnu prayers, we strike our chests over our hearts. I understand this as trying to open our hearts like we're opening a hole in a wall. And I'll close with another quote from Rabbi Buckdall's sermon. "A heart of many rooms," our tradition calls us. A heart that is big enough to care for our own and the other. A heart that is strong enough to respond to the cries of both Isaac and Ishmael. A heart with empathy enough for all of God's children. Continue with Hachikadesh on page 519, followed by the silent Amidah 520.